پر افغانستان د اسلامي امارت یو کال تیریږي خو لا هم نړیوال مشروعیت نه لري. اروپایي ټولنه د ګوتو په شمېر په افغانستان کې د هغو سفارتونو سره مله وه چې تیر کال یې دلته خپل سیاسي دفتر پرانیست، خو په وینا یې چې تمرکز یې پر بشري مرستو دی او پر دې دی چې په افغانستان کې بشري ناورین مهار کړي. آیا افغانستان کې د اروپایي ټولنې لومړیتوب اوس هم بشري ناورین او بشري مرستې دي؟ سیاسي برخه کې له اسلامي امارت سره پر کومو مواردو بحثونه کړي دي؟ څومره په خپل ماموریت کې بریالي ول او د راتلونکي لپاره څه پلانونه لري؟ سلام، زه نجیب لالزو یم، تاسو ځانګړې مرکه له شمشاد څخه ګورئ. زما میلمه کابل کې د اروپایي ټولنې مرستیال ځانګړی استازی ښاغلی ارنوټ پاولز دی. Mr. Pouwels, welcome and thank you for giving us your time.
Salam.
Your mission as Deputy Representative of the EU delegation to Afghanistan is ended and you're about to leave the country. Which kind of Afghanistan do you leave behind?
In Afghanistan, that's once again at a turning point in its history. It's gone through a lot of evolutions with changes in rulers, with more than 40 years of violence. I think people, rulers outside world should look at Afghanistan as a point where opportunities still exist. It has been a huge shock for everybody, including the Taliban, for women in cities, for political elites, for international community. We are just 1 year later now, which is long and not long. I think now after 1 year, everybody should look at the future and find solutions to live together in a peaceful way.
If you tell me about your mission, Mr. Pouwels, what did you really achieve in the country?
That's a tough question. European Union, like the rest of donors and political actors, European Union is special because we're both. And we are in the country. We never really left the country except for a short... we were back here on September 20 already, with a presence in Kabul and continuing our work both on humanitarian aspects and other assistance and political observations. What did we achieve? We helped with others tackle the large humanitarian crisis that has...
You mean with foreigners? You mean with foreigners?
With other donors, with UN agencies, local and international NGOs. That humanitarian crisis has many causes. Some of them are 15 or 20 years of armed conflict and a drought, but there are other causes too. We continued to support healthcare, education, and the economy through supporting small businesses. This is significant, but at the same time, at the scale of the needs, only a few drops in the ocean.
And were the results convincing till now?
In a way, yes. The outlook last winter was very bleak because we have a humanitarian crisis, but also an economic and a financial one. The reasons for those crises are different. They are perhaps more of a political nature, but the impact is huge for the people. If you lose income, if businesses lose income, it has a knock-on effect for the entire population. So before the winter last year, things looked rather bad. Humanitarian action helped the country get through the winter, get through here.
Yeah, you're leaving, but someone else is going to take on your position, Mr. Pouwels. What have you done? What are you going to leave undone for your successor?
The political landscape, civil society, media have changed profoundly. So as a diplomat in the country, as an actor in the country, a guest in the country, you need to rebuild your network. Some of the media have remained. You are one of them. Your news outlets and yourself and other colleagues. I went to another media outlet yesterday I salute the courage of media people to continue to work in difficult circumstances, economically difficult and politically difficult. So what is the work that needs to be continued is to consolidate this new network, meet new people, and in my view, we have to combine broad-scale political analysis with also a lot of human contacts, person to person. We tend to forget that in diplomacy.
Yeah. It has been more than 1 year of the Islamic Emirate power regain in Afghanistan. How do you compare the Afghanistan of last year's August and now? What changes do you see? And what changes?
Well, I think there are many. There's, in some aspects, if you look at the history of a country, sometimes you see over a century evolution, but not revolution. Perhaps the Taliban takeover is of that kind. There is one group in the country that took power through violence in an unconstitutional way, and that is why we cannot work directly with that government, also because a number of their leaders are on terrorist lists that are established by the UN Security Council, so the whole world. This creates problems. That small group that took the power imposed their view on how society should be run. They claim it's based on religion, but almost all Afghans I meet or voices in the public voices say, no, this is not religious, this is personal interpretation of some people. This is not a recipe for stability. The ones who suffered most are obviously adolescent girls. Schools were closed immediately after August 15. A few weeks later or months later, they opened again for boys, but not for girls. We were told, give us some time. We had expected by the new school year in March, after Nowruz, for those schools to be opened. And to the surprise of the entire nation, it was not the case. As a diplomat, we listen to what happens in a country. And what I hear is that almost the entire nation wants those schools to open. And this is the message we bring to the Taliban, saying your people wants the schools open. A few weeks ago, there was a conference in Tashkent. China was there, Russia was there, European Union, United States, regional countries. All of them insisted on the same set of expectations from the Taliban leadership, which include for the EU and many others, human rights and schooling. There is no country in the world where the official policy of the government says adolescent girls, secondary school girls cannot go to school. This measure on its own.
And you talked about the violence that the Islamic Emirate, you claimed it, and they took the power through. What the Islamic Emirate is reasoning that there was a vacuum of power in 15th August last year, and we were obliged to enter the Kabul so that we can secure the people, the city, and to prevent any potential looting or chaos.
I think your description of August 15 is correct. It was the result of 15 years of violence. So August 15 should be seen differently than the 15 years before that.
Thank you. I remember, Mr. Pouwels, when you first reopened your political office last year in September, you said that the concentration will be on humanitarian crisis, how to tackle and how to provide assistance, rather than political issues, or political issues what was not the priority at least. Is it still the approach of the EU?
The EU, and for the political part, has a multiple-pronged approach. My colleague, Mr. Thomas Nicholson, who is the European Union Special Envoy, his main task is to work on the political issues with the Taliban leadership, with regional countries and globally. So he travels and meets Talibs in Doha, Tashkent, or even Kabul. That's his focus. The focus of the delegation is indeed, as you said, on humanitarian, on broader assistance, but also permanent observation in the country and permanent technical engagement with the de facto authorities.
If you can briefly tell me, Mr. Pouwels, in terms of humanitarian assistance and that political part that Mr. Nicholson is carrying on, what are your achievements in this 1 year?
There's a huge, so for a long time the European Union did not speak to the Taliban. Some countries did in the past, and the most spectacular example is of course the United States, who concluded an agreement with them in Doha in the beginning of, in a couple of months, 3 years ago. The EU was not there. We started talking to them only relatively recently, before August 15, way before, but still. We have to, in general, and this goes for everybody, we need to get to know each other better. The Taliban were a military opposing force. They were running a military campaign with means that in some cases are considered terrorist. These now they are ruling. We don't recognize the legitimacy of their rule, but we recognize the fact that they are there and are in control. In the interest of the people of Afghanistan, of regional and global stability, we need to work with that reality. Not like we would want it to be, but like it is. We need to get to know them in their new roles, and they need to engage with us from that new perspective. And then see together if we find common ground, and then if we can work on that common ground. It is a delicate balance. There are lots of emotions from people in Afghanistan, from young women who can't go to school, from women who lost their jobs in the public sector. This is an underestimated psychological and economic blow. They have strong emotions. There's the diaspora that has a very particular view on things. So me being in Afghanistan, I feel the heat and the pressure from outside. What are you doing here? Why are you speaking to the Taliban? What have you achieved? And these are legitimate questions. In my answer I say, what's your alternative? I think it should be clear that the alternative cannot be anything that is violent. There should be a political solution. But to find a political solution, you need to sit around the table in a transparent and respectful way.
I know, and you have explained to me in the past, Mr. Pouwels, the 5 basic principles of the EU when it comes to recognition and giving legitimization to the Islamic Emirate. After 1 year, do you see any flexibility in the Afghan interim government to sort of endorse or accept those principles so that they can go to the next phase, which is the legitimization and recognition?
Because their tasks are now much larger. It is their responsibility to run the country because they wanted the power and they took it and now they have it. So they have to run the country. By doing that, they are confronted to the many different opinions in this country. We talked about going to school and perhaps also work for women. They have to find a position towards that. And as an observer, again, we see that there are differences across the spectrum. Actually, the vast majority of the entire society, and that includes Talibs, want girls to be able to go to school as long as they themselves wish, in the entire education. So have they evolved? I think they are finding out that governing is a very difficult task, that you can approach it with a small set of fixed principles, or or that you have to tackle the reality as it is in all its complexity. So after 1 year, we've seen evolution, and I think it's widely shared. The first couple of months were different than the beginning of the year. It is clear that the decision in March on not reopening girls' schools, and then the pronunciations at 2 ulema gatherings, the one in Kabul, the one in Kandahar, point to a certain centralization of the power in the hand of perhaps one person or a very small group. Historically, this is not a recipe for stability or success. And I think many observers are aware of that. So have they changed, or do we see evolution? Evolution, certainly. In which direction? It is too early to say. And as we said in the beginning, or it is our analysis, that we are at a turning point, at the point of choice, where despite all the differences and all the difficulties and all the emotions and all the violence of the past, there is hope for the future. Or we go to a certain worldview which is imposed with violence and disrespect, and then we don't know what's going to happen over the long term.
Yeah. Before I jump into the girls' schools, Mr. Pouwels, my last question in this part is about the humanitarian crisis. Is Afghanistan still the world's worst humanitarian crisis after 1 year?
It is certainly among the worst crises in the world. There are other places with huge problems. There is the drought issue in the Horn of Africa. There is also violence there in a number of countries. There is continuation in Yemen. Humanitarian misery, it's not a competition. It is a horrible fact of life. We are not optimistic. We brace ourselves for another tough winter, and it requires a large humanitarian effort, a large financial effort in an environment where there are less financial means available. Prices of food have gone up, prices of energy have gone up, and that is because of the war of aggression by Russia on Ukraine. The whole world suffers from it, so we should come together to solve that war. But it's going to be hard. We are not optimistic, and I think we expect from the de facto authorities optimal coordination, that they play their role to make assistance as efficient as possible. We do see, unfortunately, signals that were there too before August 15 of unwarranted, unneeded control over aid delivery. Coordination and communication with authorities is good and normal, but everybody should play the role. So we should avoid anything that is not efficient, let alone corrupt.
The question was like almost the entire population of Afghanistan. I'm sure you have heard the discussions of girls' schools with the authorities. Have you received any promising response about the reopening?
The short answer is no. The official answer of the authorities here in Kabul is that the government, the interim government, is pro-education for all. And they add, we know, and then, primary schools are open, tertiary education is open, boys can go to secondary school. There is an issue with girls' schools, but that will be resolved hopefully soon. This soon, we've been hearing it since last year, since 8 months, 10 months. The whole world is looking now to see that implementation in practice. And the important thing is that girls can get a proper education, a modern education, sustained with recognized degrees, so that they can put their talents to the service of their own country and of their families' existing and future. This is important. We do not expect a grandiose announcement. We expect just schools to be reopened. Yeah. So it is not looking too good, actually.
Generally speaking, Mr. Pouwels, is the EU, the European Union's in the US thought, position towards Afghanistan differ or is the same?
Between the US and the EU, you mean?
Yeah.
I cannot speak for the US. US is a major ally of the United States and vice versa. We see this again because of the biggest war on the European territory, European continent since the Second World War, 75 years ago. So the alliance that was built over the last century, unfortunately, is there again in all its strength needed. I mean, there is violence and there was a response needed. So we're good allies in general. I think on Afghanistan there is a big difference between us. Afghanistan is on the Eurasian continent. The US is not. So the EU has interests in what happens in Afghanistan. Instability here will affect us, and that is why we are here looking through the issues with a humanitarian glasses, with our general policy approach of promoting values, human rights, democracy, and of course also in relation to security. And on security, we are speaking about terrorism. I come from a country that was directly hit by terrorism, coming from the Middle East, from ISIS-controlled Syria. This could happen again. So despite the assurances of the Taliban that Afghanistan will not be used as a basis, and there are a lot of groups that are intent of creating problems, and this is a point of attention. A number of policy things on Afghanistan are set in the UN Security Council. Yeah. It is there that there are travel bans, that there is sanctions because of terrorism. So the major global players are member of that council.
I know you do not speak for US, but the people of Afghanistan want to know that is the US alone in terms of implementing policies and doing things in Afghanistan or towards Afghanistan abroad, or is it an international consensus? In terms of US strikes in Afghanistan, air strikes, and the US drone patrolling Afghanistan space, is the European Union on the same page with the US? Do you agree?
The information I have is the one that is publicly available. US President Joe Biden announced, I think it was on August 1 or 2, that his government had conducted a drone strike in Kabul. So we found out like the rest of us. I think there the Doha agreement of early 2020 is a bilateral agreement between the United States and Taliban. Both signatures to that agreement refer to it, want to uphold it, and as seen from the European Union, we think this is a good way to go. That agreement was difficult to reach. It was imperfect, but it is something to refer to. So that is positive. Parts of those agreements refer to anti-terrorism. This is a global concern. As I said, it was expressed in Tashkent. it is also part of the 5 elements you refer to as main policy priorities for the EU here. So yes, anti-terrorism is certainly something where we would seek cooperation. So to answer to your question, I think all the large actors have acted in a way that is sometimes unilateral, sometimes bilateral, sometimes in a smaller group, sometimes globally, depending on the topic and depending on the opportunity too. Yeah. So the conference in Uzbekistan, organized by the Uzbek government, was successful, was positive. It brought around the same table many, if not all, that should be there. We look forward to a continuation.
Yeah, we have seen some political movements by diaspora Afghans in the number of European countries, specifically by those who have recently left Afghanistan. This movement is being deemed by the Islamic Emirate here in Afghanistan as interference by the EU member states in internal affairs of Afghanistan. What is your position? What is your response?
Well, I would not know where those unidentified people are. I am not in touch with them. So this is the first thing. We know even less of their activities. We know there was a meeting announced in Ankara, which is, Turkey is not part of the European Union, but it is a close partner. And then thirdly, there is such a thing as hospitality and asylum. A number of those people had European visas or knocked on the door and say we feel threatened because of the takeover, and they were probably right to feel threatened. So when diaspora is present in European countries, they will act according to their status under their asylum procedure wherever they are. Some of them hold double nationality, are nationals of the country. So it is a complex picture. We are for freedom of expression. We are for political action, but violent action is something that brought an enormous amount of misery on Afghanistan, and we should be very much aware of that.
Yeah, in short words, Mr. Pouwels, my last questions. Are you supportive of the travel ban on Taliban leaders, or you oppose that?
I cannot pronounce myself on that. That's part of policy setting at the capital. I think there are pros and cons to that, and we just have to take note of the result of the debates inside the Security Council, where 15 countries are sitting there, and we take note of that result.
Thank you so much, Mr. Pouwels.
You're welcome. Tashakkur. Manana.
Thank you. درنو لیدونکو ځانګړې مرکه همدومره وه، تر بیا ښې چارې.
له لیدلو مو مننه.